Captain Lisa Morgan stepped off the transport ship and onto the space station called Concordia. The massive structure floated in neutral space between three star systems and served as the meeting place for the most important discussions in the galaxy. Today it would host the Galactic Ethics Symposium, and Lisa knew this meeting could change everything for humanity. The docking bay buzzed with activity as delegates from dozens of species prepared for the conference. Lisa watched tall elven figures glide past with their flowing robes and pointed ears. Their movements seemed too graceful for normal gravity, and their eyes held wisdom that came from living for centuries. Behind them walked the crystalline beings from the Hegemony Coalition. Their bodies looked like living diamonds that caught and reflected light in ways that hurt to look at directly. Lisa felt small compared to these ancient races. Humanity had only joined the Galactic Council 5 years ago, and most species still saw them as violent newcomers who barely knew how to stop fighting each other. The humans had been given this chance to attend the symposium, but Lisa knew many delegates expected them to embarrass themselves. Commander Kate Rivers walked beside Lisa carrying a small data pad that contained their presentation materials. Kate had been Lisa's security chief for 3 years and knew how to read the mood of any room. They both understood that today was about more than just attending a conference. It was about proving that humans belonged among the stars. The main conference hall stretched out like a cathedral with seats arranged in circles around a central speaking platform. Each species had their own section designed to accommodate different body types and environmental needs. The elven area featured elegant curved benches made from what looked like grown wood. The crystalline beings sat on platforms that hummed with energy and cast rainbow patterns on the walls. Lisa found the human section near the back of the hall. 3 simple chairs sat in a small alcove that felt almost like an afterthought. She wondered if the placement was deliberate or just another reminder of humanity's low status in galactic society. Kate took the seat beside her while the 3rd chair remained empty. Dr. Amanda Stone would join them virtually from Earth when the technical presentations began. Counselor Alindra Moonwhisper took the center platform, and the hall fell silent. Her voice carried easily through the vast space without any visible amplification technology. She welcomed the delegates in a dozen languages, including the harsh clicks and whistles of species Lisa had never encountered. The topic for this year's symposium was acceptable parameters of warfare and resistance, and Lisa knew why humanity had been invited. The galactic community wanted to address what they saw as the human problem. Humans fought too much, refused to surrender when outmatched, and caused chaos wherever they went. Alindra began her opening remarks about civilized warfare and the importance of knowing when to yield to superior forces. She spoke about honor in defeat and the wisdom of accepting guidance from more advanced civilizations. Her words painted a picture of warfare as something elegant and controlled, where the outcome was decided by clear superiority, and the losing side gracefully accepted their fate. Listen carefully as other speakers took the platform. Ambassadors from the crystalline beings talked about mathematical precision in conflict resolution. They described wars that lasted only hours because inferior forces recognized their disadvantage and surrendered. Immediately the crystalline beings had conquered 17 worlds this way with minimal casualties because their enemies chose wisdom over futile resistance. General Voctor represented the Dominion species, and his massive frame dwarfed the speaking platform. He explained how proper military doctrine required assessment of enemy capabilities and immediate surrender when facing superior technology. His people had never lost a war because they only fought when victory was certain, and expected the same rational behavior from their opponents. The morning progressed. Lisa began to understand the real purpose of this symposium. Every speaker emphasized the same themes. Resistance against superior forces was primitive behavior. Advanced civilizations accepted defeat gracefully. Fighting showed lack of wisdom. Guerrilla warfare and insurgency were forms of terrorism that civilized species should never use. Kohler Sylviana Starweaver presented historical examples of species that had learned to integrate peacefully into galactic civilization. She showed how the Andromedon traders had given up their independence to join the crystalline hegemony, and how the spiral arm colonies had accepted elven guidance after brief conflicts in every case. The message was clear. Smart species knew when they were beaten. Lisa felt the weight of expectation pressing down on her. Every eye in the hall seemed to focus on the human section during these presentations. She could sense the unspoken question hanging in the air. When would humanity learn to behave like a civilized species? When would they stop their constant rebellions and accept proper authority? During the lunch break, Kate leaned over to whisper in Lisa's ear. "The fix is in," she said quietly. "They brought us here to shame us into compliance." Lisa nodded. She had reached the same conclusion. This was not really a symposium about ethics. It was an intervention designed to teach humanity their place in the galactic order. The afternoon session brought more of the same. Delegate after delegate presented cases against resistance movements and praised the virtue of accepting defeat. Speaker after speaker explained why rebellion was inefficient, immoral, and ultimately futile. The underlying message grew stronger. With each presentation, humans needed to learn how to lose gracefully as the day wore on. Lisa noticed something interesting in the way other species looked at her. Some showed pity as if she represented a child who would eventually learn better behavior. Others displayed barely hidden contempt for what they saw as human stubbornness. But a few seemed genuinely curious about what she might say when her turn came. The final speaker of the day was Elder Karnax from the Voidwalkers, an ancient species that rarely attended galactic gatherings. His words carried special weight because his people had existed when most current civilizations were still developing written language. He spoke about the natural order of the universe, where stronger civilizations guided weaker ones, and resistance to this order brought only suffering. When Elder Karnax finished his presentation, the hall fell into respectful silence. Counselor Alindra stood to address the assembly. Tomorrow, she announced, they would hear from the human delegation about their species' approach to warfare and resistance. She paused for a moment before adding that she hoped humanity would use this opportunity to demonstrate their commitment to civilized behavior. Lisa felt hundreds of eyes turned toward her as she stood to acknowledge the introduction. She kept her expression calm and professional, even though her heart was racing inside her mind. She could hear Dr. Amanda Stone's voice from their preparation sessions, repeating the same phrase over and over. "They have no idea what they are asking for." When Lisa spoke, her voice carried clearly through the hall. "Thank you, Counselor Alindra, for this opportunity to address the assembly," she said. "I have listened carefully to all the presentations today, and I understand the questions you want answered about human behavior. I request 48 hours to prepare a proper response, because I believe you will find humanity's perspective on warfare and resistance to be quite illuminating." The hall buzzed with quiet conversation as delegates discussed her words. Lisa sat back down, knowing that she had just committed herself and all of humanity to a presentation that would either earn them respect or confirm their reputation as dangerous primitives. Kate squeezed her shoulder in support, while Lisa activated her communication device to contact Dr. Stone on Earth. Tomorrow would change everything. The second day of the symposium began with formal debate sessions, where species could challenge each other's positions. Lisa arrived early to find the hall already buzzing with anticipation. Word had spread about her request for preparation time, and many delegates seemed eager to see how humanity would defend their reputation for stubborn resistance. Counselor Alindra took the platform wearing robes that seemed to shimmer with their own light. Her centuries of experience showed in every graceful movement. As she addressed the assembly today, we examined specific cases of resistance and rebellion to determine what constitutes acceptable behavior in civilized warfare. She activated a holographic display that showed star maps and historical data. The first case study involved the Meridian Uprising, where human colonists had fought against elven peacekeeping forces for 6 months before finally surrendering. Alindra walked through the timeline, highlighting each point where the humans could have yielded with an aura. Truly advanced civilization recognizes when further resistance serves no purpose, she explained. Her voice carried the weight of absolute certainty that came from millennia of elven philosophy. At every stage of this conflict, the human colonists faced overwhelming superiority in technology, training, and numbers. Yet they continued fighting, even when victory became mathematically impossible. The holographic display zoomed in on battle sites where human fighters had used improvised weapons and guerrilla tactics against elven forces. Alindra pointed to examples of humans hiding in caves, launching surprise attacks, and refusing surrender even when surrounded. She described these actions as evidence of primitive thinking that prolonged suffering for both sides. This behavior demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of how civilized species conduct warfare, she continued. When faced with superior force, the rational response is negotiated surrender that preserves life and allows for peaceful integration. Continued resistance after the outcome becomes clear serves only to satisfy primitive emotional needs. General Wachter stood to support Alindra's presentation. His massive form made the speaking platform creak under his weight. The Dominion had studied human military tactics for years, and his analysis was thorough, and damning resistance movements are terrorism. By another name, he declared in his booming voice, they target civilian infrastructure, use unconventional weapons, and hide among non-combatants. These tactics violate every principle of honorable warfare that civilized species have developed over thousands of years. The general activated his own holographic display, showing human resistance movements from Earth history. He had clearly done extensive research on human conflicts, and his presentation covered everything from ancient rebellions to modern insurgencies. Each example was used to demonstrate the same point, that human resistance tactics were barbaric and destructive. Furthermore, he continued, resistance movements prevent the natural order, where stronger civilizations guide weaker ones toward better futures. When humans refuse to accept proper authority, they deny themselves the benefits of advanced knowledge and technology. Their stubbornness keeps them trapped in primitive patterns of behavior. Ambassador Zixtera rose from her crystalline platform to add the hegemony's perspective. Her diamond-like body cast rainbow patterns across the hall. As she moved, the mathematical precision of her species' thinking was evident in every word she spoke. From a purely logical standpoint, continued resistance after military defeat has been established makes no statistical sense, she stated. Her voice resonated with harmonic frequencies that made her words seem to come from multiple sources. The energy expenditure required for prolonged insurgency always exceeds any possible benefits gained. She displayed complex mathematical models that showed resource allocation during extended conflicts. The crystalline beings had calculated the exact point where resistance became counterproductive, and their equations seemed to account for every variable except one: human emotional investment in abstract concepts like freedom and independence. The most efficient path forward always involves immediate integration into the superior civilization, she concluded. This allows for optimal resource distribution, technological advancement, and social development. Prolonged resistance delays these benefits for generations. The morning progressed. Speaker after speaker presented similar arguments. Each species shared examples of how they had successfully integrated defeated enemies into their civilizations. The common theme was always the same, that wise leaders knew when to surrender, and primitive ones did not. Lisa sat quietly through these presentations, taking careful notes and observing the reactions of different delegates. She noticed that some species seemed uncomfortable with the implied criticism of human behavior, while others nodded in agreement with every condemnation. Kate sat beside her, maintaining professional composure, despite the increasingly pointed attacks on human character. Scholar Sylviana Starweaver presented what she called the integration success model, using historical data from dozens of worlds that had peacefully joined elven civilization. Her research showed clear patterns where early surrender led to faster development and better outcomes for conquered populations. The data strongly suggests that species who accept elven guidance within the first year of contact achieve technological parity within 50 years, she explained. Those who resist for extended periods, remain developmentally delayed for centuries. The correlation between early surrender and eventual prosperity is undeniable. Her presentation included interviews with leaders from integrated worlds who praised the wisdom of their ancestors for accepting elven authority. These testimonials painted resistance as a tragic mistake that only delayed inevitable benefits. When the formal presentations ended, Counselor Alindra opened the floor for direct challenges and questions. The atmosphere in the hall grew tense as delegates prepared to confront the human position. Several species had clearly coordinated their approach, and their questions came in rapid succession. Elder Karnak spoke first, addressing Lisa directly. Young human, how do you justify your species' unfortunate tendency toward insurgency when faced with superior civilizations? The mathematical evidence clearly shows that resistance prolongs suffering and delays benefits. General Voctor followed immediately. Why do humans refuse to accept the natural order where advanced species guide primitive ones toward better futures? Your own history shows countless examples where earlier surrender would have prevented massive casualties. Ambassador Zixtara added, her challenge from a different angle. How do you reconcile human resistance patterns with basic logic? When defeat is mathematically certain, continued fighting becomes an irrational waste of resources that serves no constructive purpose. The questions continued for nearly an hour, with delegate after delegate challenging different aspects of human behavior. Each question was carefully crafted to put Lisa in an impossible position where any defense of human resistance would sound like advocacy for primitive violence. Throughout this verbal assault, Lisa maintained her calm professional demeanor. She took notes on each question and occasionally asked for clarification, but offered no substantive responses. The assembled delegates began to murmur among themselves, wondering if the human representative had been overwhelmed by the logical weight of their arguments. Finally, Counselor Alindra called for order and addressed Lisa directly. Captain Morgan, the assembled delegates have presented compelling evidence about the counterproductive nature of resistance movements. We have shown historical data, mathematical models, and philosophical frameworks that all point to the same conclusion. She paused dramatically before continuing. Your species has been invited to this symposium because the galactic community hopes to help humanity overcome these destructive patterns. We want to understand how you can defend behaviors that clearly contradict civilized norms. The hall fell completely silent as every delegate waited for Lisa's response. She stood slowly and walked to the center platform with measured steps. Her heart was racing, but her voice remained steady when she finally spoke. Thank you, Counselor Alindra, and all the distinguished delegates for your questions and presentations, she began. I have indeed listened carefully to every argument made here today, and I understand exactly what you are asking of humanity. She looked around the hall, making eye contact with delegates from different species. Before continuing, however, I believe there has been a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of human resistance. I request permission to address this misunderstanding with a comprehensive presentation that will clarify humanity's position. When would you be prepared to make this presentation? Alindra asked. Lisa smiled for the first time since arriving at the symposium. Tomorrow morning, Dr. Amanda Stone will join us from Earth with research that I believe will illuminate aspects of human behavior that have not been previously understood. I think you will find our perspective quite different from what you expect. The hall erupted in quiet conversations as delegates discussed this unexpected development. Many had expected the human representative to offer apologies or promises to reform human behavior instead. She seemed confident that she could justify the very actions they had condemned. As the session ended, Lisa felt the weight of expectation pressing down on her. She had committed herself to defending not just human resistance but the entire philosophical foundation of human civilization. Tomorrow she would either earn humanity a place of respect among the stars, or confirm their reputation as dangerous primitives who could never be trusted with true power. Pate walked beside her as they left the hall and whispered quietly, "Are you sure about this?" Lisa nodded, knowing that Dr. Stone was already preparing materials that would shock every delegate in that room tomorrow. They would learn that human resistance was not a choice that could be changed through argument or education. It was something far deeper and more fundamental than anyone in the galaxy had ever imagined. The fourth day of the symposium began with an atmosphere of electric tension that crackled through the conference hall. Delegates who had attended hundreds of diplomatic gatherings found themselves facing something completely unprecedented. The human presentation had shattered fundamental assumptions about civilization behavior and the nature of resistance itself. Lisa returned to the platform with Dr. Amanda Stone appearing once again as a hologram from Earth, but this time her digital form was surrounded by massive data displays that stretched across the entire hall. The sheer volume of information was staggering: genetic sequences, historical timelines, population analyses, and pattern recognition. Algorithms that had taken years to compile. Yesterday we explained the genetic basis for human resistance behavior, Dr. Stone began, but today we want to show you the full scope of what this means. We have compiled comprehensive data spanning the entire history of human civilization, and the patterns we discovered will change how you understand not just humans, but the nature of social evolution itself. The first display activated, showing a timeline that stretched back 50,000 years. Every major advancement in human civilization was marked with genetic data, showing the resistance patterns of key individuals. The cave painters who risked their lives to preserve knowledge in hidden chambers showed the highest concentrations of resistance markers. The farmers who defied tribal leaders to experiment with new crops carried the same genetic signatures. Lisa watched as delegates leaned forward in their seats, trying to process the implications of what they were seeing. Human progress was not driven by compliant individuals who followed established patterns, but by rebels who challenged conventional wisdom at every turn. Dr. Stone highlighted specific examples that demonstrated the pattern in ancient Mesopotamia. The individuals who developed writing systems were considered dangerous radicals who threatened the power of oral tradition keepers in Egypt. The architects who designed new construction techniques faced resistance from established guilds and religious authorities. Every human breakthrough came from someone willing to challenge authority and conventional thinking, she explained. The genetic markers are consistent across cultures, time periods, and geographical locations. Human civilization advanced because rebels kept pushing boundaries that conservative elements wanted to maintain. The data flowed like a massive wave, washing over preconceived notions about human development. Scientists who challenged religious doctrine carried resistance genes. Explorers who sailed into unknown waters despite warnings showed the same patterns. Artists who created new forms of expression that shocked established critics had identical genetic signatures. General Wachter stood up with obvious agitation in his voice. This suggests that human military effectiveness comes not from training or technology, but from genetic programming that makes surrender impossible, he said. How can any enemy predict human behavior if they are literally incapable of rational defeat? Stone smiled at his observation. You are beginning to understand the implications. Human soldiers do not just fight to win, they fight because losing while fighting is genetically preferable to surrendering. The psychological cost of submission activates stress responses that are more painful than physical injury. She displayed neurological scans showing brain activity patterns in humans faced with surrender scenarios. The data revealed that compliance with unjust authority triggered the same neurological responses as physical pain, while resistance behaviors activated reward pathways associated with survival and reproduction. Ambassador Zixtera had been running calculations throughout the presentation, and her crystalline form pulsed with urgent light patterns. The mathematical implications are staggering, she announced. If human resistance is triggered by injustice detection algorithms, then they represent a biological monitoring system for systemic problems. Lisa nodded appreciatively at the ambassador's insight. That is exactly correct. Human populations become restless and rebellious when social systems develop fundamental inequities. Other species might not notice these problems until they reach crisis levels, but humans begin. showing resistance behaviors much earlier Darstone activated. A new display showing modern examples from Earth history. Human communities that developed successful resistance movements consistently identified real systemic problems that other observers had missed. Environmental activists who fought corporate pollution often proved correct about ecological damage decades before official recognition. The pattern held across every area of human society. Civil rights movements led by individuals with high resistance markers consistently identified injustices that mainstream society eventually acknowledged. Women who fought for political equality faced ridicule for decades before their demands were recognized as legitimate. Scholar Sylviana had been taking detailed notes throughout the presentation, and her excitement was visible as she stood to address the assembly. This explains historical anomalies that Elven scholars have never understood, she said. Human societies that appeared stable often collapsed suddenly, while others that seemed chaotic somehow survived major crisis. Dr. Stone confirmed her observation. Human resistance genes create what we call adaptive instability. Societies that try to suppress these behaviors become brittle and fail when unexpected challenges arise, while communities that channel resistance into constructive change develop resilience. The presentation continued with case studies from across human history showing how resistance movements had prevented or survived disasters that destroyed more compliant civilizations. The Roman Empire declined partly because it eliminated resistance-minded individuals, while smaller human communities survived by adapting quickly to changing conditions. Lisa took over to address the philosophical implications. You have been asking the wrong question about human behavior, she told the assembled delegates. Instead of asking how to suppress human rebellion, you should be asking how to ensure there is nothing worth rebelling against. She activated displays showing successful human societies that had learned to work with, rather than against, resistance genetics. Communities that created fair systems and responded quickly to injustice indicators experienced less disruptive rebellion, while societies that ignored early warning signs faced violent upheavals. Dorstone presented her most comprehensive analysis, showing how human resistance patterns had actually accelerated social evolution on Earth. Other species developed stable societies that persisted for millennia with minimal change, but humans constantly modified their systems in response to resistance pressure. This genetic programming creates a feedback loop, she explained. When systems become unjust, resistance behaviors increase until changes are made. Then new equilibrium develops until the next round of problems emerge. The result is constant adaptation that prevents systemic failure. Elder Karnax spoke with obvious awe in his ancient voice. You are describing a species that has evolved biological mechanisms to prevent social stagnation. This explains why human civilizations advance so rapidly compared to other species. Data supported his conclusion. Human technological and social development had progressed faster than any other known civilization, because resistance genes ensured that no system remained unchanged long enough to become completely static. Other species achieved stability, but humans achieved continuous improvement. General Wachter returned to his military concerns with new understanding. This means that occupying human populations is essentially impossible, he said. The genetic programming ensures that resistance will continue indefinitely, regardless of the costs or apparent futility. Darstone agreed completely. Historical data shows that human resistance movements can persist for generations even when facing overwhelming technological superiority. The genetic imperative does not calculate odds of success, it simply responds to injustice. Trigger's ambassador Zixtera had reached a startling conclusion based on her mathematical analysis. Human populations could serve as early warning systems for galactic civilization, she announced. When humans become restless, it indicates systemic problems that other species might not detect until damage becomes irreversible. Lissa seized on this insight as the key to humanity's future role in galactic society. Instead of fearing our rebellious nature, she said, you should harness it. Make us your early warning system. When humans start getting restless in any system, that is your signal that something fundamental needs attention. The presentation reached its climax as Dr. Stone revealed the full scope of human genetic diversity. Different populations carried different concentrations of resistance markers, creating what she called a distributed monitoring network. Some humans were programmed to detect economic injustices, while others responded to environmental problems or social inequities. The combined effect creates comprehensive surveillance for systemic problems, she explained. No single human population can detect every type of injustice, but the species as a whole maintains sensitivity to virtually any form of systemic failure. Counselor Alindra stood slowly, her graceful form trembling slightly with the implications of what she had learned. You are proposing that humanity serve as a biological monitoring system for galactic civilization, she said quietly. A species designed by evolution to detect and respond to injustice. Lisa confirmed her understanding. Exactly, that is precisely what we are proposing. Our genetic programming makes us incapable of ignoring systemic problems that other species might overlook or tolerate. We cannot help but respond when we detect unfairness. Darstone presented her final analysis showing how human integration into galactic civilization could benefit every species. Human resistance genes would activate only when real problems existed, providing early warning before crises developed while remaining dormant in just and fair systems. The hall erupted in intense discussions as delegates processed the implications. Some species showed obvious excitement about having access to such sensitive monitoring systems, while others worried about the unpredictability of human responses, but none could deny the logic of what they had witnessed. As the session ended, Lisa looked out at the assembled representatives, knowing that the conversation had fundamentally shifted from how to suppress human nature to how to utilize it constructively. Tomorrow, they would discuss practical implementation, but today had proven that humanity's greatest weakness could become the galaxy's greatest strength. The genetic tsunami had swept away old assumptions and revealed new possibilities that no one had imagined when the symposium began. Human rebellion was not a problem to be solved, but a resource to be carefully managed for the benefit of all civilized species. Final day of the symposium brought delegates together in smaller working groups scattered throughout the space station Concordia. The massive revelations about human genetics had shattered the formal conference structure and forced species representatives into intensive private negotiations about what this discovery meant for galactic civilization. Lisa found herself moving between different diplomatic chambers as various species sought to understand the implications of working with, rather than against, human resistance genetics. The conversations ranged from excited speculation about new possibilities to worried discussions about managing unpredictable human responses. In the crystalline being's private chamber, Ambassador Zixtara had converted her entire delegation area into a massive calculation matrix. Light patterns flowed across diamond surfaces as her people processed the mathematical implications of human genetic programming. The precision of their analysis was both beautiful and terrifying to observe. We have run 17,000 simulation scenarios, she announced to Lisa and the assembled delegates. The mathematical models consistently show the same result. Human resistance genetics provide optimal early warning systems for systemic failure, but only if properly integrated into existing governmental structures. General Vokter occupied a heavily reinforced chamber designed to accommodate his species' massive physical requirements, but his concerns had shifted dramatically from the militaristic perspectives he had expressed earlier. If humans cannot be conquered through traditional means, then we must reconsider our entire approach to galactic expansion, he admitted. Lisa listened as the general explained how Dominion military doctrine assumed that defeated populations would eventually accept integration through superior force. The human genetic data had revealed this assumption to be completely false when applied to Earth populations. Human resistance movements can persist for generations, regardless of technological disadvantages, he continued. This makes traditional occupation strategy is counterproductive because they trigger exactly the behaviors we want to avoid. Counselor Alindra convened the largest working group in an elegant chamber, where elven philosophers had gathered to debate the ethical implications of the human revelation. Her species had spent millennia developing theories about civilized behavior, and the genetic data challenged fundamental assumptions. We have always believed that advanced civilizations naturally evolved beyond primitive resistance behaviors, she said to the assembled group, but the human data suggests that resistance may actually be a sign of evolutionary advancement, rather than primitive thinking. Scholar Sylviana Starweaver had been analyzing historical parallels, and her findings supported this new perspective. Elven records show that our most innovative periods coincided with increased social tension and questioning of authority, she reported. Perhaps we eliminated beneficial traits when we selected for harmony and compliance. The philosophical implications rippled through elven society as they realized that their pursuit of perfect social harmony might have actually reduced their adaptability and innovative capacity. Human chaos was beginning to look like a feature rather than a bug. Gelder Karnax had requested a private meeting with Lisa in a chamber designed for the most ancient and revered species. His people had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, and his perspective carried enormous weight in galactic politics. In our observations spanning millions of years, he said slowly, civilizations typically follow predictable patterns. They develop stability, achieve technological advancement, and then stagnate until external pressures force change or destruction. Humans appear to have evolved internal mechanisms that prevent this stagnation. Lisa nodded, understanding the significance of his observation. Human societies never achieved the kind of stable equilibrium that other species consider ideal. Our resistance genetics ensure constant pressure for improvement and adaptation, the elder continued, with obvious fascination. This suggests that humans may represent a new evolutionary approach to civilization development. Instead of achieving stability and maintaining it, you have developed systems that continuously evolve in response to internal pressure. Amanda Stone joined these discussions via hologram, her research data now being analyzed by scientific teams across dozens of species. Her genetic work had opened new fields of study that would occupy researchers for decades to come. The most interesting discovery has been the distribution patterns of resistance genes across human populations, she explained. Different communities show different concentrations and types, creating a complex monitoring network that responds to various forms of systemic problems. Commander Kate Rivers had been observing these negotiations with professional interest, noting how quickly former opponents had shifted to collaboration once they understood the strategic value of human genetics. The security implications were staggering. If human populations can detect systemic problems before they become crises, then preventing human unrest becomes a matter of maintaining just systems. She observed this creates powerful incentives for good governance across all species. The working groups gradually converged on a revolutionary proposal that would reshape galactic civilization. Human populations would be integrated into existing governmental structures, not as subordinate colonies, but as specialized monitoring systems with significant autonomy and authority. Ambassador Zixtera presented the mathematical framework for this integration, showing how human resistance genetics could be calibrated to detect different types of problems at various scales. Local human communities could monitor planetary systems, while larger populations could assess galactic-wide trends. Efficiency gains are substantial, she reported. Systems that respond to early human warnings avoid crisis-level problems that typically require massive resource expenditures. Current galactic governments spend enormous amounts managing failures that could be prevented through human early detection. General Wachter had reached similar conclusions from a military perspective. Human resistance genetics make them ideal for identifying potential rebellion conditions in other populations, he explained. Instead of fighting human insurgents, we could employ them to prevent insurgencies among other species. The proposal that emerged from these negotiations was unprecedented in galactic history. human communities would be established throughout civilized space with specific mandates to monitor social, economic, and environmental conditions. Their resistance behaviors would serve as early warning systems for problems that other species might miss. Counselor Alindra presented the formal proposal to the full assembly on the final evening of the symposium. The elegant chamber had been reconfigured to accommodate the largest gathering in galactic diplomatic history. Representatives from species that rarely interacted had come to witness this historic moment. We propose the establishment of the Human Integration Protocol, she announced, her voice carried across the vast hall with ceremonial gravity. This protocol recognizes that human resistance genetics represent a valuable resource for maintaining just and stable galactic civilization. The protocol outlines specific roles for human communities, including monitoring systems for detecting systemic injustices, early warning networks for identifying potential social problems, and advisory councils with authority to recommend corrective actions. Lisa stood to accept the proposal on behalf of humanity, knowing that this moment would be remembered as the turning point when Earth moved from the periphery to the center of galactic civilization. We accept this responsibility, she said, with formal dignity, understanding that our genetic programming makes us uniquely suited for these roles. Dr. Stone provided the scientific foundation for implementation, explaining how different human populations could be matched with appropriate monitoring assignments based on their specific genetic profiles. Communities with high environmental sensitivity would monitor ecological systems, while groups with economic resistance patterns would oversee trade and resource distribution. The unanimous acceptance of the Human Integration Protocol represented more than just diplomatic agreement. It marked the recognition that biological diversity in intelligence and behavior patterns was not a problem to be eliminated, but a resource to be carefully cultivated. Elder Karnax provided the closing statement for the symposium, his ancient voice carrying the weight of galactic history. We have witnessed the emergence of a new paradigm in civilized development, he said. Humanity has shown us that resistance to injustice is not primitive behavior, but advanced evolutionary programming. As delegates prepared to return to their home systems, Lisa reflected on how completely the situation had changed. A week ago, humans were considered dangerous primitives who needed to learn civilized behavior. Now, they were recognized as possessing unique capabilities essential for galactic stability. Commander Kate Rivers joined her as they watched the various species delegations departing the station. We went from being the problem to being the solution, she observed with obvious satisfaction. Lisa nodded, but her expression remained thoughtful. The real work starts now, she replied. We have to prove that we can fulfill these responsibilities without letting our resistance genetics create the problems we are supposed to prevent. Dr. Stone appeared one final time as a hologram to address the departing delegates. The genetic data shows that humans function best when they have meaningful challenges that engage their resistance programming, she explained. Monitoring galactic justice provides exactly the kind of purpose that channels these traits constructively. Symposium ended with formal ceremonies establishing permanent human delegations to major galactic institutions, but the real significance lay in the fundamental shift in how intelligence and civilization were understood. Diversity in behavioral programming was no longer seen as a weakness, but as essential for long-term stability. The last transport ships departed from Concordia Station. Lisa remained behind to finalize the implementation details for the Human Integration Protocol. The document that emerged would establish humans as the immune system of galactic civilization, detecting and responding to systemic problems before they could threaten the stability that other species had worked millennia to achieve. The debate about war ethics had evolved into something far more significant: the recognition that different types of intelligence were needed to maintain just and stable societies. Human rebellion was no longer a problem to be solved, but a resource to be carefully managed for the benefit of all civilized species. In the end, the species that had been invited to apologize for their rebellious nature had instead taught the galaxy that rebellion itself could be the foundation of lasting peace. when properly understood and appropriately channeled toward the detection and prevention of injustice.